Wow, we Fife millennials to inherit £227,567, each from their baby boomer parents. QVT. Okay, guys, so here we are. Five millennials to inherit £227,567, each from their baby boomer parents. I mean, the total value of homes owned by baby boomers in Fife alone come to, is that right? 6.8 billion.
Billion, yeah.
It's like, that's what that number looks like, 6.8 billion. Wow, that's a huge number. And 2/3 of Fife millennials are actually set to inherit all that in the next few decades. Could this be the answer to the housing crisis? Could Fife millennials live it up for the next few decades, safe in knowledge that they will get a huge lump sum to pay off all their debts and buy a house with what's actually left? Before I look at that, and before we look at this in general, which set of people in Fife exactly are the Fife millennials and the Fife baby boomers? So we've got today's show, we've got Perry on, we've got Richard on. Perry, what's your thoughts on this? It's like, you know, I always think to myself, I'm going to inherit loads of money. When you know, later on from inheritance, it's like, okay, but who do you want to die?
I know, it's quite an extraordinary situation, isn't it? And it's strange. We were really shocked when we saw that number. Richard and I were talking about it before we came on the show about how it would be that number and actually where we fitted within the generations. So I'm just excited to see where I sit and see what's coming my way. But no, on a serious note, no, absolutely. It does make a big question as to how fortunate some may be in the future.
So what exactly are these sets of Fife millennials or Fife baby boomers? Where do they come from? What age groups are they?
Well, it's quite interesting because we're probably going to show a little bit of where we are in all of this. So you've got our silent generation, which are our people that are born kind of 1945-ish. So your 77-year-olds and overs. And as we all know, everybody's living so much longer now, aren't they? They've just got such better health nowadays, haven't we? So that's kind of your silent generation group.
So born in 1945, and before 77 years older, that's my mum and dad, effectively. They were born just 1945, 1939. Yeah, so that's about right. That's it. That's called the silent generation. I never knew that.
I didn't know that
either, actually.
But I guess actually it makes sense when you think about it, because they are just in the background, living their best lives and just getting on with things, aren't they?
Baby boomer generation, what age group are they? What years are they?
So that's your 1946 to 1964. So that's your kind of 58-year-olds up to your 76s. So again, quite a big.
Just missed that.
I was just going to say, Jim, you just missed that.
I know, we're kind of all in a similar camp, apart from Richard, because he's way too young. Generation X, that's where we sit, Jim.
Yeah.
So Generation X is your people born 1965 to 1980. So 42 years and to your kind of 55-ish ends. So
just scraped in there. I'm kind of a baby boomer and a Generation X. I'd like to think about both.
Jim. Yeah, you're floating in between. It's not like you'd be in both camps, Jim. Multitasking again.
What's the next one then?
Yeah, our millennials. So our millennials are 1981 to 95. So that's your 27-year-olds and above. So my two boys sitting there. That's just happened 2 weeks ago.
So they're called millennials.
And,
so you millennial, Richard?
Yeah, I'm 1986. So.
Yeah. Okay. So Generation Z. You know. So what? So we had a Generation X, which was the 42 to 55, which is round about our camp. Generation Z then. What happened to Generation Y?
Did
they get missed out? Is there a thing? Is there something called Y?
X and Y.
So Generation Z, what they 1996. So everyone under 26-year-old.
Yeah.
So this is what I'm coming to say. I mean, using data from the census, the research actually shows that 33,389 households in Fife owned by the Fife baby boomers, that's the 1946 to 1964, 58 to 76 years old, and they are worth a combined £6.8 billion. Now, the generation that will inherit those properties will be the millennials, which and there's 44,943 millennials in Fife. So there's more millennials than there is households, if that makes sense. After looking at the local demographics, home ownership statistics, and the current life expectancy, around 2/3 of those Fife millennials have parents who own 333, I'll get this right, 33,389 properties, meaning each is in line for an inheritance of 227,000 £567 and 6 pence.
Which is quite a lot.
Hey, see that?
Yeah. So literally,
Amazing.
nearly 45,000 people are going to get nearly $250,000. In essence.
When you put it into that perspective, that's quite mind blowing, isn't it?
Yeah,
Mad.
that kind of start to me is quite surprising. Being a millennial, I didn't sit here expecting to be handed down $250,000 anytime soon.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's quite a surprising start to hear.
You might see a lot of activity in visiting the parents now after this show.
I've got 3 siblings as well, so.
And if anybody out there, you know, if you're a millennial, I'm getting mixed up now.
Millennial, yeah.
If you're a millennial, okay, you'll inherit that. I could be your best pal, by the way. Okay.
So, I mean, say you're in that position though, what kind of recommendations would you give to what someone who maybe doesn't understand that or appreciate that that's the amount that potentially is coming to them on average?
Yeah.
What would they do with that? Say they don't need it, and say that they are fortunate enough to be in a position where they've got great jobs and they've got a mortgage already and they're living their best life in their own home and got in a relationship, etc. Because you're talking about people between 27 and 41. So you get that $250,000. What do you do with it?
Invest it wisely.
I was just going to say, I know what I would do.
I'll be honest, and I said it to my parents, by the time you've actually popped your clogs and you're going to leave me something, guess what? I don't need it. Maybe you should have given me it before then. That's the kind of way I look at it, and that's the way I'm looking at it with my children now. It's like I'm making sure they're actually I pass on some of that wealth now, because I don't. It's maybe just a scarcity thing. We all live in this world where it's like, oh God, I'm going to run out of money, and it's like when you look at it, you're down to your last £30,000, and it's like, okay, so what are you getting paid every year? Oh, I'm getting about £20,000 in my hand. So you've got enough money to last another 1.5 years. Is it going to envisage a time when you're going to have 1.5 years and you've got no money at all coming in? Well, no, really. So why are you holding on to £30,000 then if that's the case? So it's that sort of. I mean, some people have bigger sums, obviously, when they retire. They're getting 25% tax free of their retirement pension. So they're getting 25% tax free. Now, for some people, I mean, I've known people that I know personally have got £600,000 pensions. So you're talking about 150 grand tax free. So, you know, is that the point that you should maybe be actually helping the younger generation, your kids, and helping them out? Some people will actually think, no, fend for themselves, but, you know, it'll teach them a lesson. It's like, I didn't prescribe to that at all. It's like, why on earth would you want them to go through the same trauma, and I will call it trauma and stress that you went to get where you are right now? Why would you not make it a lot easier for them? Give them a help up so they're further up the ladder when they begin, rather than having to start at the bottom like you did. So why would you not do that? And that's my sort of prescribed mentality towards this, Perry. What's your thoughts on this, Richard? Obviously, you're younger. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
do you subscribe to the camp that, like, you know, they're going to give it now, so it'll help me now rather than actually later?
Well, I'm fortunate enough to be in an all right position and thinking ahead to the future and thinking investment and things to make sure that I'm okay in the future.
Yeah.
I didn't have children, but if I did, obviously that I would be definitely in the same mindset as you. But there's people my age and slightly younger that I do look at and I think and I worry. I thought, God, where are you going to be come retirement age? I mean, what are you going to have? How are you going to survive? Especially with the way things are going recently. I mean, the cost of living and inflation and just everything combined, it's going to be quite difficult for a lot of people.
Can I make a well thought out clear judgment that I saw here when you said that? You said, I worry about other people. Do you know they probably didn't even worry about themselves?
Well, that's true. I know, but I mean,
you probably do more worrying for them than they do themselves, and that's exactly why they are where they are and why they will be where they will be. As a result, it's all the decisions they've failed to make, or they've let other people like the state make for them, and thinking the state is actually going to look after them. That's not going to be the case.
Well, speaking as a millennial, and maybe like for that kind of that age group, I wouldn't be sitting here relying on the state or on an inheritance to see me right later in the future. I'm going to have to do that for myself. So that's the way I look at it.
Yeah. So the silent generation, what about them then? Well, there's about 30,560 homes in Fife owned by the silent generation. Now, the silent generation, just to go back to, is the people born before 1945. And they're worth about, a staggering 6.2 billion. It's like, we're talking about a lot of billions a day. I mean, the issue for those who will inherit their parents' homes is that there are far more Generation X people in Fife than millennials. So 2/3 of, in other words, of the 71,267 Fife Generation X will inherit 132,743.97 pence. Still nothing to sniff at, yet not as much as the millennials. So whilst the Fife millennials are less likely to own their own home compared to Generation X, and so have done not as well in amassing their assets and savings, they're more likely to benefit from an inheritance boom in the years to come. So this could actually be another boom coming in terms of the amount of wealth that's going to be inherited by the next generation. My thoughts around this, though, is will they be prepared for it? Because remember, it's all very well. It's a classic example about, you remember the people used to win the pools. Remember they used to win the pools. They used to win millions, and then you would hear the sub story about a year later they lost the whole lot. It's that kind of mentality, and I always used to wonder how on earth could you lose the whole lot? How is that possible? And then when I've known about all the years, they never learned how to keep it in the first place, and they never learned how to earn it in the first place. Therefore, it was easy for them to lose it because they didn't have the habits created in order to keep it. So, more than anything, my thought process out of that is, all very well, they're going to inherit that money, but are they going to be prepared to inherit that money? Are they actually going to know how to handle that money?
Exactly. Well, they have the skills for it at the end of the day. It's interesting because I'm reading something at the moment and it talks about that, about your habits and your daily commitments that you make to yourself to kind of better yourself and move forward in your life, no matter what age you are, and things that you learn. And one of the things that I've read about this morning was basically if you live a chaotic lifestyle and then you somehow receive a lump sum of money, actually you will treat that money in a chaotic fashion because you don't know how else to manage it, and actually therefore end up with nothing.
Oh, that's getting deep, isn't it?
Because that makes sense, and I think as you become a lot more, if you have been a bit chaotic in the past, as you become a wee bit more structured and settled in your life, it's how you treat other things. So if you've got a more structured and settled lifestyle, when you get money, you're going to treat it the same. And I know I can totally see your point there.
Yeah. And this is likely to be very comforting information for those Fife millennials, including some of the humbler upbringings who historically have been unlikely to receive an inheritance at all. Nevertheless, inheritance is not the silver bullet that will get you, the millennials, onto the Fife housing ladder. Nor will it deal with the increased wealth and inequalities in British society, as the inheritance they are likely to receive won't be accessible when they're trying to buy their Fife first home.
Yeah,
That
so I
makes
think
sense.
any inheritance is going to come later on, like you say, when you don't need it, probably.
Well, that's it, Richard, isn't it? It's like, if you're going to give it now. Don't wait till later on, even if it's just some sort of thing to help me out. I often, I'm not going to be a huge advocate of this, but it's a thought process. I've often thought to myself, in order to give your kids a good start, and you've got all your money tied up in your house, maybe you should consider equity release.
I've
So
seen
then
some
it does release it, because equity release can now be, it doesn't roll up, if that makes sense. You've got the option to roll it up every year, but after 7 years you're basically due double the amount of what you borrowed in the first place, so you don't want to do that. But you can actually get equity release schemes. I mean, Willie Shan does this. He actually administers this now. He's our equity release advisor, so we know Willie very well. But Willie showed me that, and he says, look, you can actually do equity release from 55 years old and up, and you can release some of your money and actually get an interest only payback on it. So as long as you're paying the interest every year, then the amount you initially released in the first place will actually be the same amount in 7, 10, 20 years time when you finally pop your clogs. So you're not paying anybody but the interest every year. So it's almost like an interest-only mortgage. So you get an interest-only mortgage out, but you're helping the younger generation and your kids, and you're helping them all in the process. So it's maybe one way of doing it, but there is other ways of doing it as well. So before all the Fife millennials start running up their credit card bills, so don't run out and buy your Ferrari Huracan or your Lamborghini Huracan right now. Safe in the knowledge that we paid for when your parents actually pass away in 20 to 30 years' time. And I still go back to saying, who do you want to die? That's the reality. Nobody wants anybody to die, but just by chance, that's how you inherit money as a result. Over half of the females and around a third of the men are going to have to pay for their nursing home fees.
that was one thing I was going to work in, and I've seen it a lot over the years as having to pay for their care.
It's going to hit the fan, isn't it? All the money, and I keep saying to everybody, all the money you're amassing right now, when anything happens to you when you're in your elderly state and you maybe got a wee bit dementia or something like that, or you've got Parkinson's, you end up having to get put into long-term care. Guess what happens to your money? It doesn't go to your kids anymore. It goes straight to the nursing home.
It's all tied up in that, isn't it? And I think that we actually see that quite often, don't we, in regards to some of the properties that we list, where that situation has happened with people and they've actually not wanted to give up the family home, but actually have found themselves in a financial situation where they've had no other choice but to give up the family home because they need it for that care. And as we know, people are living so much more longer than before, and independently so. I mean, we've just looked at that silent generation and how much of the property market that they potentially value hold. So, will that actually even come to fruition in an actual market or not for those independent people that are related to those individuals? Because actually chances are that it won't in the future.
Yeah, Richard, I mean, you get this quite a lot with doing lettings, don't you? Where people actually end up letting the house. Because that's another avenue where they could actually get money every single month, but actually retain the asset and keep a hold of it still.
Yeah, that is something that comes around quite a lot, and that is another option to do that rather than to lose the money to the care home by selling it and obviously wiping away the inheritance. They rent the property and use the profits for that. But sometimes, although rental prices are good, it's still not enough to cover care home costs. They are quite high.
Well, that's what you were saying. I mean, I recently read about 25% of people who must pay for their nursing home fees actually run out of money and therefore have to rely on the funding from the local authority. Therefore, if you are a millennial, no inheritance will be left for you then if that's the case. And so it goes without saying that most parents want to give some inheritance to their children. So how do we go about this? How do we go about this? Do you put it in? Do you go to your solicitor and you get it all transferred to your children before you pass away? Do you put it in trust? Do you do a living will? There's all different scenarios in this, and I would say, we don't know the answer to this question, but we can give some ideas and some thought processes to it. But you should always speak to your solicitor or your legal advisor or your financial advisor, your professional advisor, to make sure you do the right thing in order to make that happen. But doing nothing will lead to this situation where your money will be taken if anything does happen to you. I mean, I've seen it recently quite a lot, and probably I could name 3 or 4 people off the top of my head where I've known if actually that's happened too, where their house is actually to be sold just to pay for care costs. So the kids actually don't get it, and for me, it's gut wrenching, you know, to sit there in front of someone and say to them, "This is what your house is worth. I know the mortgage is completely paid off in it." And they're sitting and I'm sitting saying, so what's going to happen to this? Well, it's all going to go to care costs. And it's like, my God, you've spent your mother and father have spent their whole life accumulating this wealth and the hope that it will be passed on to you, only to see it basically swallowed up by the system. And you will not see any of it at all.
It's a sad situation, isn't it? And I think that's why people need to get that independent advice as well, to know what tools are available to them. Because there can be, although you can use other mechanisms of transferring it, there's timelines within that transfer as well, and the person becoming poorly from when you can do it and when it's null and void, etc. So getting some good advice is definitely the best way forward, isn't it?
Yeah. So I could only say, if you're waiting until you pass away to help your children or even your grandchildren with a legacy, it could be seen as too late. So what are the actual options? Well, one solution is to help and fix the housing crisis in Fife and in the UK as a whole, is if parents and grandparents, where they can help financially with a deposit for a house, whilst their children and grandchildren are in, say their 20s and early 30s. I mean, that's a really good solution, isn't it? I mean, I did that for my daughter anyway.
I think it is, and that's a key thing to do. I mean, my boys are 27, and certainly part of our thing was to kind of try and get them set up so that they could enjoy their lives without stress and worry. So it's nice to be able to have them where they've got their own places where they can make their own homes.
Yeah. Here's a good statement, Richard. Buying a Fife property is much cheaper than renting. I mean, we've shown it many times in the past, in past articles, but it might not be. It's not a case of being able to afford the mortgage. The problem is raising the mortgage deposit, which is about between 5 and 10% for the Fife millennials themselves, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's also the upkeep. We spoke about this. People rent as a lot more easier option where they have repairs and things. They don't have to worry about any of that. They've not got the upkeep of the property. They've not got all that additional cost that comes with being a homeowner as well. And there's more and more people now choose to rent because all they've got is a rent to pay, and that's all they need to worry about. And everything else, and obviously their bills and things. But I mean, the upkeep and running costs of a property are less than whether you own it as well. So that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, for me, rental is an option. I mean, we'll eventually rent finally anyway once we give everything away. So this is our plan, you know, eventually just to rent our home from our own company, which is a really good thought process. My own company pays for all the improvements. I just pay the rent every single month, but I actually get the income, and the tax is actually the only liability I actually pay, if that makes sense, because it comes back to me anyway. That's pretty tax efficient. in terms of, and I'll keep you posted about how that happens and why that happens. But I've not really seen anybody else do this, and I'm thinking this actually makes absolute sense to me. To do that, to actually have your next home in a limited company and then actually rent it to yourself because you're a legal entity in your own right. Even your children could own that limited company and rent it to you, and then that income goes in, the rent gets taxed with the deductions of it, and therefore it goes back to your children who can actually give it back to you.
Yeah, we were going to touch on that in the Wealth Creation Show on Monday, but we're running out of time. I think we're going to carry it on to the next week. So
talk about it in this week's and go through that. Maybe families should actually be discussing the distribution of family wealth whilst everyone is actually alive, in the form of helping family members with house deposits, as opposed to waiting until the end, as it will make a massive difference to everyone in the short term and even in the long run as well. You know, what's your thoughts on this? I mean, we briefly talked about it in the show anyway, Perry. But do you think this is actually what we should be doing? What everybody should be doing?
I think it is. I think it's the most proactive way. I mean, certainly from my parents, I know their thought and I, as a parent, have done it as well, where you're constantly thinking to strive to improve your life and your assets to help your family in the future. But actually, as we're all living longer and we get to that end point, we may not be actually financially able to help them because it may be taken away from us. So I think for me, doing something proactive about it just now, getting a good advice from an advisor, and then being able to kind of take some of that wealth and distribute it to your family so that they can have an easier life and move forward better for their lives. And you've got them then on a foundation where actually you're creating them the opportunity to be financially independent for their own future in case something doesn't work out as planned.
Makes sense, doesn't it?
I think, like Perry says earlier, there is time scales and restrictions on when you could do things. So if you're leaving it close to the time where maybe it gets to the point and you or your parents need to go into care and things, then you've not got a choice. They're going to take that money. Whereas you think about it early on and think, right, okay, we'll use this money and put it down on property for you and work it out that way earlier in the game. You're not going to get obviously caught out later and then be stuck with obviously the restrictions and what you could do with the money and moving it about at that time.
Final thoughts on it, Perry?
Be organised, be structured, get some sound advice, and take care of people now when you can, and actually let them enjoy their life and have that stability to build on their own futures, really.
What about yourself, Richard? What would you think? What would you say to people who are a bit younger then?
Yeah, I think plan ahead and think of your future. And even not just obviously from a millennials point of view, from older point of view as well. If you're thinking about your children, then think about doing something sooner rather than later. So yeah, definitely planning and speaking to the right people who can advise you on how to do that correctly.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I prescribe to that as well. I mean, why not see your legacy getting passed on now, so you could see them actually enjoying that and what the fruits of your labour is as well. I mean, that's exactly what you want to do. I mean, why wait till you actually die, because you'll never see anything. Exactly. So actually, do it now. Do it now, so you actually see, and so you know, and you can help and nurture the next generation. Now, after all, that's the whole responsibility of being a parent, is it not? To make sure the next generation that comes after you, you've actually looked after, actually prosper as a result of it. Or at least that's what I think anyway. I don't know what anybody else's opinion out there, but I kind of think that's bound to be a popular opinion, surely. Or why else would you have children?
It's certainly my opinion. I mean, they didn't ask to be here. We brought them into the world.
Absolutely.
They're our responsibility to a certain stage, aren't they?
As I used to remind my mum when I was a teenager. Anyway, that's it, guys. Thanks very much for coming on. I mean, really, in that situation, it is a win-win for everyone, isn't it?
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic to discuss.
Okay. And that's it. And that's the midweek show just now. If you've got any further comments, please feel free to mention anything in the post. We'll catch up with it later. I'm more than happy to take your comments. Tag somebody that this might affect as well, because the reality is you want to make sure your legacy is passed on to your next generation. You want to make sure it's passed on tax efficiently as well, and you want to make sure they reap the benefits of what you're actually doing rather than actually going to the state. And that's it, guys. Bye-bye for now.
Bye. It's goodbye for them.
And then